The rain had been falling for 6 hours when Elena Hale ran barefoot down the marble steps, her heels abandoned behind her. Her wedding ring clenched so tightly in her fist that it cut into her skin. Her phone burned against her palm. Mom collapsed. Come now. Behind her, through the towering glass doors of the Cross Enterprises gala, her husband's voice thundered over the music and champagne. Elena, walk out that door and don't bother coming back. She froze. For one terrible second, she turned toward him. 300 of Manhattan's richest people watched in silence as she stood between the man she had married and the mother who had raised her. Elena said nothing. She turned away and ran into the storm. She thought she was choosing her family. She had no idea she was walking straight into the biggest lie of her life. Before we go further into Elena's story, if you believe some choices are worth losing everything for, type "I would choose family" in the comments below. And don't forget to hit subscribe and let us know which city or country you're watching from tonight. Now let's go back to where it all began. 6 years earlier, Elena Hale was 26 years old and folding towels at a laundromat on the edge of Queens, the kind of place where the fluorescent lights buzzed louder than the dryers. She wasn't ashamed of it. She had grown up watching her father, Walter, repair other people's cars for cash that barely covered rent, and her mother, Doris, clean houses on the Upper East Side she would never be invited to sit in. Elena had learned early that dignity had nothing to do with money. What she hadn't learned yet was that some kindness comes with strings so fine you don't feel them until they tighten. The night she met Julian Cross, she wasn't looking for a rescue. Her car had died outside a restaurant she could never have afforded to eat in, and a man in a charcoal coat had stopped, knelt in the slush, and fixed her radiator hose with his bare hands like he'd done it 100 times. "Rich men don't usually know how engines work," she said, half joking. He looked up at her, half smiling, oil on his fingers. This rich man grew up poorer than you'd guess. It was the first lie he ever told her, though she wouldn't understand that for years. They married 11 months later, in a courthouse, not a cathedral, because Elena had insisted, and because back then, Julian had wanted nothing more than to prove to her and to himself that he could be a different kind of wealthy man. His mother, Vivian Cross, sat in the front row of that courthouse, wearing an expression like she'd swallowed glass, and said only 4 words to Elena afterward: "You won't last long." Elena smiled and said nothing. She should have listened. For the first 2 years, Elena told herself the whispers didn't matter. The board members who called her the maid's daughter behind lacquered smiles, the society pages that ran unflattering photos with captions dripping in condescension, Vivian's constant needling comments about adjusting Elena's manners, her clothes, her posture, even the way she laughed too loudly at dinner parties. Julian defended her at first. He held her hand under tables. He told his mother to stop. But defending someone and choosing someone are not always the same thing, and slowly, so slowly Elena almost didn't notice, Julian began asking her to be smaller, quieter, less herself. "Just for tonight," he'd say, "just for this deal." There is always a just for this, until one day there have been so many that a person disappears inside them. Her parents, meanwhile, had vanished from her wedding photos and from Julian's dinner parties entirely. Not by cruelty exactly, but by 100 small omissions. Walter and Doris Hale lived in the same cramped 2-bedroom apartment they always had, 4 hours from the penthouse Elena now called home. And every time she suggested bringing them into her new life, Vivian found a reason it wasn't the right moment. Elena kept sending money quietly, kept calling every Sunday, kept a version of her old life folded away like a secret she was somehow ashamed didn't need to be a secret at all. What she did not know, what no one had told her, was that her father, Walter Hale, had once been a mechanic at a garage owned by a man named Arthur Cross, Julian's father. And 31 years ago, Walter had discovered something in that garage's back office that Arthur Cross never wanted found: falsified insurance claims on a fleet of company trucks. Filed the same month, 3 of Arthur's drivers died in accidents that were ruled unavoidable. Walter had said nothing to the police. He had only quit, taken his silence, and disappeared into obscurity, a debt he'd been quietly repaying with a lifetime of poverty he never explained to his daughter. If you're starting to feel there's more beneath the surface of this story than anyone in it realizes, that's exactly where we're headed. So like this video now if the mystery has already pulled you in, and let's keep going. The call came on a Tuesday in March. Doris Hale had collapsed in her kitchen, and the hospital said it was her heart. Elena was in the middle of a fitting for the gala gown Vivian had chosen for her. A gala meant to secure a $500 million merger with an investor named Desmond Reyes, a man Julian had spent 8 months courting. When Elena told Julian she needed to leave for the hospital, he didn't even look up from his tablet. Send a car for them. Have them meet you hereafter. Reyes specifically asked to meet you tonight, Elena. This is the biggest deal of my career. Your career, Elena repeated quietly, or your mother's approval? Julian's jaw tightened. Don't do this tonight. I'm not doing anything. My mother might be dying. She's stable, the nurse said so. You can go tomorrow. I'm going now. It was the first time in 6 years Elena had said no to him in front of staff, in front of cameras waiting outside, in front of the life he had built where her compliance was simply assumed, like weather. Something shifted in his face. Not anger yet, but the cold, calculating look of a man recalculating a variable he thought he'd already solved. She went to the hospital anyway. Doris was pale against white sheets, an oxygen tube taped beneath her nose, but awake, and when she saw Elena, she started crying before Elena even reached the bed. You didn't have to come, baby. You had your party. Mom, stop. Elena took her hand. Nothing matters more than you. Walter stood in the corner, arms crossed, saying nothing, the way he always said nothing when emotion ran too close to the surface. But his eyes, when Elena caught them, held something else. Fear. Not for Doris's heart. Something older. She stayed at the hospital until 2 a.m. When she finally returned to the penthouse, exhausted, mascara streaked, still in the emerald gown she'd changed back into out of habit, Julian was waiting in the dark living room with a glass of scotch he hadn't touched. Reyes walked, he said flatly. The deal's dead. He said if my own wife won't show loyalty to my family in public, he can't trust my company privately. Elena felt the floor tilt. Julian, my mother had a heart attack, and I told you she was stable. You don't get to decide what's an emergency in my family. This is my family too, Elena. Or did you forget whose name is on that penthouse, that car, that closet full of gowns you're standing in right now? The words landed like a slap, and worse. She saw, in the half second after he said them, that he meant them. If you've ever had someone throw your gratitude back at you like a debt, comment, I know that feeling below, and hit subscribe if you want to see exactly what Elena decided to do next. She didn't cry in front of him. She waited until she was in the guest bathroom, water running, before she let herself shake. And in that silence, staring at her own reflection, she made a decision that had been building in her for 6 quiet years. She would not spend one more night being told her family was the weight and his was the wings. The following morning, she packed one suitcase. Not because she was leaving, not yet, but because for the first time, she needed him to understand she could. Vivian found her in the hallway, suitcase in hand, and for once her voice wasn't cruel, just tired. You think you're the first woman who thought love was enough to erase where she came from? I told him. Poor blood doesn't dilute, it just waits. You don't know anything about my blood, Elena said, and walked past her. She moved into her parents' apartment that week. The same cramped room she grew up in, the radiator that clanked at 3 a.m., the smell of Doris's cooking soaking into wallpaper that had never been replaced. Julian didn't call for 4 days. When he finally did, it wasn't an apology. It was lawyers discussing a prenuptial agreement neither of them had ever expected to actually use. It was in those quiet, humbling weeks, sleeping on a pull-out couch, riding the subway again, watching her father's hands, permanently stained with old motor oil, tremble slightly whenever the phone rang, that Elena began to notice something was wrong beyond her marriage. Walter had started locking the apartment door twice. He'd stopped going to his usual diner, and one night, she woke to find him standing at the window at 4 a.m., staring down at the street like he was waiting for someone he was afraid would come. Dad, she said softly, what's going on? He didn't turn around. Go back to sleep, Elena. You've been different since I moved back. Ever since Mom's heart attack, Is there something you're not telling me? A long silence. Then finally, there are things I did before you were born, things I thought I buried deep enough. What things? He turned to her then, and in the streetlight his face looked older than she had ever seen it. If Julian Cross's family ever finds out you're back in this apartment, ever finds out you're my daughter, staying here at this address, Elena, you need to leave. Tonight, if you can. That single sentence rewired everything Elena thought she understood about her own life. Her father wasn't just poor. He was hiding. If a father's warning like that has ever sent a chill down your spine, comment keep going. Because the truth Walter had buried for 31 years is about to surface, and it will change everything you think you know about this family. Elena refused to leave. Instead, she sat her father down at the same kitchen table she'd done homework on as a child, and for the first time in her life, Walter Hale told her the truth. He told her about the garage, about Arthur Cross, about the falsified insurance claims tied to 3 dead drivers, claims that had made Arthur Cross millions in payouts he was never entitled to, built on paperwork Walter himself had accidentally seen while covering a night shift. He told her he'd taken photographs, back when photographs meant film you had to develop in secret, and he'd hidden the negatives, never used them, because Arthur Cross had come to him personally, calmly, and made him understand exactly what would happen to his family if he ever spoke. He didn't threaten me with money, Walter said, voice shaking. He threatened me with time. Said a man like him could make sure I never worked in this city again, that my daughter, you weren't even born yet, would grow up knowing her father as the man who ruined their family trying to be a hero. So I said nothing. I quit. I disappeared into being ordinary, and I told myself it was enough that we were safe. Dad, Elena whispered, Arthur Cross is Julian's father. Walter's face went the color of the walls. I know. It hit her like a wave crashing over a boat she thought was steady. Her marriage into the Cross family had not been coincidence dressed as fate. Someone in that family had known who she was the entire time, and that someone had let her walk into that house anyway. She confronted Vivienne first, not Julian, some instinct telling her the mother would crack before the son. She found her at the Cross family's private club, sipping tea like nothing in the world could touch her, and Elena sat down across from her without being invited. You knew, Elena said. You knew who my father was before Julian ever brought me to that garage that night. Vivienne set down her cup with the precision of a woman who had rehearsed this moment for years. I've known since the first week you two started dating. I had you investigated the way I investigate everyone who gets close to my son. And you let it happen anyway? Why? Vivienne's smile was thin and bitter. Because I thought it was poetic justice. Arthur ruined your father. I thought watching his son fall in love with the mechanic's daughter, without either of them ever knowing, was the closest thing to karma this family would ever get. I never expected you to actually stay married this long. I never expected either of you to fall in love for real. You used me, Elena said, as a punishment against a man who's been dead 6 years. I used you, Vivienne corrected coldly, as a mirror. And mirrors are only dangerous when someone finally looks into them and doesn't like what they see. If you sense there's an even bigger secret waiting behind Vivienne's calm, you're right. Like this video now, because what happens next changes the entire shape of this story. Elena left the club shaking, and it was there, in the back of a cab crawling through midtown traffic, that Julian called her for the first time in nearly 3 weeks. His voice was different. Not cold, not commanding. Quiet, almost afraid. Elena, I need to see you. Tonight. It's about my father. She almost hung up. Instead, some old current of love she hadn't managed to kill pulled her toward the penthouse one last time. He was standing by the window when she arrived, the city glittering behind him like something fragile. On the table between them sat a manila folder, worn at the edges, decades old. I found this in my father's safe after he died, Julian said. I never opened it. Some part of me knew whatever was inside would break something. I was right. Elena opened it. Inside were photographs, old, grainy, unmistakable, of the same falsified insurance documents her father had described. Alongside them, a letter, handwritten from Arthur Cross to no one in particular, dated the year Julian was born. If anyone ever finds this, know that I did what I had to do to build something for my son. Walter Hale's silence cost him everything. It bought Julian a future. I will not apologize for that arithmetic. Julian's hands were trembling. My father built our entire company on a lie that destroyed your father's life. And I married his daughter without either of us knowing, and somehow, Elena, some sick, twisted part of me thinks maybe none of that was an accident either. What do you mean? I mean, I think my mother knew who you were from the beginning. I think she let this happen because she wanted to watch it happen. Elena stared at him. She told me the same thing an hour ago. The silence between them stretched long enough to feel like its own kind of confession. I chose your family over the deal that night, Elena finally said, and you called it disloyalty. But you have no idea what loyalty actually cost my father. 31 years of silence, of poverty, of watching your family build an empire on his stolen dignity, and he never told a soul because he was protecting me from a man who is now your dead father. Julian's voice cracked. I am so sorry. I didn't know any of this. I believe you didn't know, Elena said, but you knew I chose my mother's hospital bed over your investor, and you punished me for it, like it was a betrayal instead of the most human thing a person can do. That's the part I can't forgive as easily. If this is the moment you've been waiting for, where love, truth, and betrayal finally collide, comment your thoughts right now and like this video if this story is hitting you emotionally, because the hardest part is still ahead. Julian didn't argue. He sat down across from her, elbows on his knees, the folder between them like a wound neither could close. I want to fix this, he said. I don't know how yet, but I want to. Not the company, not the merger. This, us, your father. You can't buy back 31 years, Julian. I know that, but I can stop hiding what my father did. I can make it right publicly, whatever that costs the company, whatever it costs me. Why? Elena asked, and it wasn't cruel, just genuinely searching. Because for 6 years I told myself I married you despite where you came from, like I was doing you some favor, Julian said, voice raw. And it turns out my entire fortune exists because of where you came from, because of what your father sacrificed without ever telling a soul. I owe your family more than I could ever repay, and instead of understanding that, I made you feel small for choosing them. I'll regret that till the day I die. It should have been the ending. It wasn't. 3 days later, Desmond Reyes, the investor whose walked-away deal had detonated Elena and Julian's marriage in the first place, resurfaced with a phone call to Julian's office that changed the direction of everything. Reyes wasn't calling about the merger. He was calling about Arthur Cross. It turned out Reyes' own father had been one of the 3 drivers killed in those falsified accidents 31 years ago, and Reyes had spent 2 decades quietly building a fortune for one purpose, to eventually own enough of Cross Enterprises to burn it to the ground from the inside. The gala, the merger. Reyes' sudden interest in Julian's company had never been business. It had been the slow, patient architecture of revenge. And Elena's chosen family, the very people she'd rushed to the hospital for, had unknowingly become the fuse that lit it. You're telling me, Julian said into the phone, standing frozen in his office, that you spent 8 months courting a merger with my company just to get close enough to expose my father. I spent 31 years, Reyes said calmly, waiting for the right moment. Your wife walking out on that gala to see her sick mother was the first honest thing I'd witnessed from your family in months. It told me she wasn't part of the cover-up. It told me it was time. If you thought the twist had already happened, comment, there's more. Because Reyes is about to force a reckoning none of them can walk away from clean. And if you're enjoying stories built on secrets and unexpected turns, subscribe now before the truth fully comes out. Reyes went public 2 weeks later, not through tabloids, but through a formal legal filing that named Arthur Cross, decades dead, in a wrongful death and fraud case revived through newly surfaced evidence. The very photographs Julian had found in his father's safe. Julian had made the decision himself to hand them over, against his lawyer's pleading, against his mother's fury, because he had promised Elena he would make it right, whatever it cost. It cost almost everything. Cross Enterprises' stock plummeted. Board members resigned. Vivian, for the first time in Elena's memory, looked genuinely afraid. Not for the company, but for the version of herself that had spent 31 years pretending she hadn't known. In a private meeting that Elena insisted on attending, Vivienne finally broke. "I let you marry into this family because I wanted Arthur's ghost to suffer," she admitted, voice hollow, "and instead I nearly destroyed my own son's happiness, and I let an innocent family carry the weight of my husband's sins for another generation. I don't expect forgiveness. I'm not asking for it." Walter Hale, for his part, did not want revenge. When Julian personally visited the cramped Queen's apartment to apologize, no cameras, no lawyers, just a man standing in a doorway he never imagined he'd be invited into. Walter studied him for a long moment before speaking. "Your father took 31 years from me," Walter said. "I won't pretend that debt is paid because you handed over some photographs. But you gave me something your father never did in his entire life, the truth, spoken out loud, in front of people who could hold you accountable for it. That's worth something. Maybe not everything, but something." Elena watched her father shake her husband's hand in that doorway, and something in her chest finally loosened after weeks of holding its breath. If watching a family choose truth over pride has moved you even a little, like this video right now, and comment the biggest lesson you're taking from Elena and Walter's story. We're almost at the end, and it's worth staying for. The final piece of the mystery revealed itself almost gently, compared to everything before it. Reyes, in the months following the settlement, a settlement that funded a foundation for families of workers killed by corporate negligence, funded largely by what remained of Julian's diminished but still substantial fortune, asked to meet Elena privately. "Your father protected you," Reyes told her over coffee, "the same way my mother tried to protect me. She never told me the truth about my father's death either, not until I was nearly 30 and found the file myself. I used to think silence was cowardice. Watching your father finally speak, watching your husband finally choose honesty over his own company's survival, I don't think that anymore. I think silence is sometimes the only shield people like our fathers had. The tragedy is that it takes decades, and sometimes people like Arthur Cross, to force the truth into the light." Elena and Julian did not simply return to the marriage they'd had before. They rebuilt something slower, more honest, less performative. A marriage where Walter and Doris Hale sat at the head of every holiday table. Where Vivienne, humbled and quieter now, spent Sundays learning to cook alongside Doris in a kitchen far smaller than any she'd ever set foot in. Learning, perhaps for the first time in her life, that the people she'd once dismissed as beneath her had a dignity money had simply never been able to buy for her own family. A year after that stormy night at the gala, Elena stood in that same ballroom, this time for the opening of the Walter Hale Foundation for Workers' Families. Her father beside her, in a suit Doris had insisted on buying him, Julian standing at the podium about to speak the truth publicly for the first time to the same society crowd that had once whispered behind Elena's back. Before he spoke, he found Elena's eyes across the room and mouthed 3 words that had nothing to do with business. "Thank you for choosing them." Because in the end, that single choice, a woman running through the rain toward her sick mother instead of toward a merger that could have secured her comfort forever, hadn't destroyed her marriage. It had cracked open 31 years of buried truth, forced an empire to answer for its foundations, and taught an entire family, one that once measured worth in zeros, that the richest inheritance anyone can leave behind is honesty, however long it takes to surface. Before you go, subscribe, share this story with someone who needs to hear it today, and comment the biggest lesson you're taking from Elena's choice, because sometimes the thing that looks like it will cost you everything is the very thing that finally sets you free. Walter Hale once said that silence protects you until the day it starts protecting the wrong people. And on that rainy night, without knowing it, his daughter finally broke a silence that had lasted longer than her own life. Some inheritances aren't written in wills. They're written in the choices we make when no one is asking us to be brave and we choose to be anyway.